Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, where industry leaders share insights on innovation with a focus on reducing cost and improving security for federal technology. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast. My name is John Gilroy, and I'll be your moderator. Today, we're going to talk about a new concept called cloud native. And in the studio, the virtual studio, we have Brandon Hertel. He is a software developer for a company called Vidoori. That is V as in victory, VIDOORI.com, and get more information. And, there's so many terms bouncing around the industry these days. And some people have misconceptions. People maybe use the wrong definition for term. And I think what we want to do is get someone who's in the trenches, who's, getting beat up and knocked around and getting, bloodied and muddy. And he knows exactly what it is and how it applies to the federal government. So before we begin, Brandon, could you give us a little nutshell about Vidoori and what kind of organizations you normally help?
Yeah, thanks, John. So at Vidoori, we typically service federal civilian agencies and in the DoD space as well. So
Good. You're a young puppy and I'm an old dog. And over the years, I've seen all kinds of phrases come and go. I mean, I remember Windows 95. I remember, cloud first. And there's so many terms that come up. And what happens initially, and you'll learn this over your career, Brandon, is that let's say it's 2020 and there's a new phrase that pops in. And there'll be like 10 definitions of it. Then by about 2023, 2024, everyone kind of agree kind of what it meant, like in the early days of Wi-Fi, there's all kinds of misconfusion about it. But after 3 or 4, it got standardized. And so there's a term that's gotten real popular here called cloud native. And there are articles written about it. There are people debating. I'm sure you can go on YouTube and hear, point A, point B, and debating exactly what it is, what it isn't. But maybe we can start off by putting yourself in the seat of a govie, maybe someone working over at transportation or someone at NIH, and maybe give us a little sketch on what's the difference between cloud and cloud native applications.
Yeah, so despite the similar name, they're actually quite different. You can kind of simply think of the two. Cloud is a place, or essentially servers that you rent over the internet. And cloud native is a methodology for developing, which is not necessarily exclusive to the cloud, right? It is a methodology which seeks to take advantage of the benefits of the cloud, the elasticity, the demand scaling, your ability to sort of cost effectively use these machines on a la carte basis, right? So
yeah, no. I think when Zero Trust was first introduced, people thought they could go to the Costco and get a bag of Zero Trust and apply it the next day. But now we found out it's more of a methodology. It's more of an approach, something like that. So the problem is it's a relatively new term. And if you go to Google and type in cloud native, you'll get 524 million hits, results. It seems like everyone's twisting and turning it to apply to themselves. Back in the early days of the cloud, people would say, yeah, we've been in the cloud business since we started. And people do this thing, the concept is called cloud washing. Oh, yeah, we've always been in the cloud. And I think that's what companies are doing, too. They're saying, oh, John Gilroy Software. Oh, yeah, we're cloud native. We've been cloud native since the start. So people can apply this to the wrong set of circumstances. So when you hear someone say that, oh, yeah, we're cloud native, how do you think, what kind of characteristics could that answer include?
Well, the first couple of things I would probably ask you is, John, does your company that is cloud native, as you say, does it employ microservices? And you might answer yes. And we could go a little bit deeper on that to really understand what your microservices situation is, because a lot of times you'll hear the term lift and shift, right? Which doesn't necessarily get you to a cloud native posture, but there's all these other things that kind of come along with it, like, a cultural change, right? If you truly want to embrace this benefit of cloud, lift and shift isn't always the way to go, but it is getting there. So first step, get to the cloud. Second, employ this cloud native methodology. But so another one would be, are you more of an agile approach, right? So another buzzword that gets thrown around a lot, but essentially what I like to emphasize there is your software development lifecycle emphasizing people over processes, right? So, are you trusting each one of your team members to implement security and understand security? So there comes a little bit of a skill gap there, perhaps, where you have to kind of train people and invest in your labor force there. But so I would kind of dive into a few of those areas to better understand what you mean by cloud native.
I'm looking at you in the Zoom call, and when I was your age, but I'm going to twist this. I'm saying when my wife was your age, she owned a Fiat Spyder. If you know what a Fiat Spyder is, it's a lot of fun, and it just breaks down hourly. It's a terrible. And so Brandon, if you owned a house in Potomac and you had a Fiat Spyder in it in the garage, it's a piece of junk. And if you moved to Annapolis and brought that car with you, it'd still be a piece of junk. It'd be a different garage. And so I think what people have discovered is that, have you moved to the cloud? Oh, yeah, we moved to the cloud. We did the lift and shift. Well, are you taking advantage of some of the flexibility and scale? Oh, no, it's the same Fiat in the garage, and my wife told me that Fiat stands for fix it again, Tony. And so that's the problem with lift and shift, isn't it, Brandon?
Yeah, it is. And, you see similar problems with Agile. You'll see situations where they have all good intentions. They want to implement Agile. And then when it comes down to it, there's external factors, I think, that kind of truly prevent certain, shops from fully embracing this new way of thinking.
Well, we're here in Washington, D.C., and you really can't talk about software development, software systems, until you talk about security considerations. So if you take a cloud application that's lift and shift, if you take a cloud application that's cloud native, so why, and this is the three-letter word, so why is it better in a cloud native environment? Why is security better?
Well, I think it's not inherently better necessarily. You do get these really nice environments if you're working with the federal government, so a lot of services within AWS or Azure being Microsoft and Amazon's offerings for cloud. You get these government ready sort of situations, right? So storage that's set up to best take advantage of modern encryption, things like that, right? And we would call those FedRAMP compliant. So those are available to you, but just like anything, if you set up the, gazebo wrong, people are going to get sunburned, right? So you're going to have to take advantage of those with best practices and learn these environments, which can have a bit of a learning curve. So to kind of tie it back to why is it best for security, they essentially allow you to kind of work more agilely, right? You're not managing the stuff underneath. You're not updating and patching things as often. That's a lot of that overhead is taken away and offloaded to Amazon or Microsoft to kind of update those, and you get to kind of focus on your business processes and what makes you money.
So let's say we sit down with a manager at an agency, pick a name, NIH. Let's grab someone from there. And so we're sitting having lunch or coffee, and then Brandon says, "Well, are you in the cloud?" They go, "Yeah, we're in the cloud. We're great. We don't have to." Well, how do you know it's set up correctly? I mean, it's one thing to be in the cloud, one thing to have the Fiat in the garage, another thing to have everything working correctly so you can take advantage of that cloud. So how would you even know?
Well, there are, like I said, there's FedRAMP compliance services, which kind of get you, out the gate, right? But if you want to look at different compliance standards, there's also FISMA. Maybe you're working with GDPR, so you're going to have to understand that a little bit more. But essentially, again, it's back to emphasizing people over processes, right? And do your people know how to configure these systems correctly? And there's lots of different things that can kind of help you with that, right? So Kubernetes or containers in general allow you to sort of be more agile in that sense because they're sort of ephemeral, right? You can kind of spin these up very easily. A lot of times their blueprints and how they're configured are set in code. So you don't have to remember, or it's not like a file out there that can be lost. And you can commit these to, version control systems, which allow you to sort of have a change of record over time, which is very useful.
When I think of the initial move to the cloud 15 years ago, it was cloud first, move to the cloud. We all know that. And what's going on today is that some applications, some are optimized from the cloud, some aren't. But increasingly, people are wondering, well, I may want to move to a different cloud or have one application here, one application there. And so you'll have multiple cloud environments. So it would seem to me that if your developers are focusing on containers and microservices and they can orchestrate all this, it would allow you to not only take advantage of the cloud, but take advantage of the hybrid cloud. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So the cloud native methodology, as I mentioned before, is really not exclusive to the cloud, right? It's how you build, deploy, and run, or build, run, and deploy your software. And that extends to, public, private, and hybrid cloud. So you touched on a little bit of vendor lock-in there, right? Another benefit of kind of embracing this methodology or sort of way of thinking about, your server in general, right? So moving from the virtual machine paradigm to the container paradigm allows you to be more portable between different cloud environments. And, speaking to the federal civilian agencies we worked with in the DoD space as well, not succumbing to vendor lock-in is very important. Having the resiliency to sort of work when one cloud is down, you're able to continue business operations is extremely important. So being able to kind of pick that up where it would otherwise be very specific to maybe Amazon or even, Microsoft, it's very handy to be able to run in multiple clouds.
I had a guest on last week, Patrick Sullivan from Akamai, and he said, well, the trend is to use containers and to use serverless environments and to use cloud native applications. And he said that it's all connected with an API. He said, the API is the network these days, John. And so I thought that was a strange statement. But if we listen to developers like you and see what you're building is the whole network and subnetting and everything else, that's not the way things are structured today. Things are structured from APIs connecting microservices. That seems to be the efficient way to handle it. Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of times API is the network where it would sort of all been contained previously, or even back to the COBOL days, everything was on the mainframe. But now you've really pulled out those applications into their sort of loosely coupled basic components, and the network serves as this sort of like fabric between the various services. So, which does open you up to a little bit more of a security surface, right? So more network requests, more things moving between different entities or containers allows you have to think more consciously about security, honestly. So that's something to keep in mind. But it does give you a lot of flexibility in terms of your data store. It doesn't have to be singular, right? So you can kind of swap in whatever data store makes sense for you. So there's a lot of benefits, but things to be considered as well.
I think there's a conference coming up in September, a data privacy conference. Is Vidoori going to be there?
Yeah, the data privacy conference in Washington, D.C. We are looking at participating in a panel and submitting a white paper as well. So definitely look out for us there.
So you can go to V as in victory, VIDOORI.com, and you can get all kinds of information on cloud native. There's going to be some white papers available. If you want to grab Brandon, you can go to this conference I think it's called the Forum Global Conference in September, and grab him, because a lot of people, my listeners, they may not want to send you an email or use a telephone, but they see it face to face. You're going to go, oh, by the way, I have a friend of mine who has this problem, and all of a sudden then you find out about situations that not as easily as you might think. When it comes to data is exploding. We know that, okay. But it's going from gigabytes to petabytes. Yeah, we know that. But there are federal agencies that may seasonally have to ramp up and seasonally ramp down. I mean, famously, the IRS. But look at FEMA. I mean, we're coming into hurricane season, and FEMA may have to bump up and bump down crap. And so if you have a lift and shift environment with a big application in there, it's not going to be as flexible as something that can switch in, switch off. I guess the word is orchestrate different services. Is that right?
Yeah. So that's what we're talking about a lot when we say Kubernetes, right? It's a container orchestration platform. So there is a little bit of a, retooling perhaps that you might have to do to get your application to run in a container environment. But actually, so we've been undergoing this at Vidoori as well. We have a product called BPT test platform, or performance test platform, and this is something we've been doing as well. Shifting a lot of our on-prem resources to the cloud and seeing what makes sense for us. It actually winds up becoming more of a hybrid situation, and the taking what was a virtual machine and moving that to the container. That's something we've done probably 3 times in the last couple months. So, with various services, it's quite a learning process, but it's definitely doable.
So what you can provide for our listeners, should they want to contact you, is that if they're considering moving to a more hybrid environment, maybe using containers, you can actually maybe test out some to make sure it would be operationally more optimized, huh?
Indeed, yeah.
Good. So When I think of environment, I think of looking outside to see if it's raining or if it's humid. But I think there's environment availability that should be concern of most federal agencies. And this would be size of data coming in. And so this ideal flexibility with Agile software, this really relates to environment availability, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess it's similar to what we talked about before with the hybrid cloud situation or multi-cloud governance even, right? Where you're sort of, working across different clouds. And that's really what containers allow us to do. And these microservices sort of architecture is sort of abstract that layer of vendor lock-in and gives us a lot of flexibility in order to move from cloud to cloud.
Well, I think that's one big benefit is it gives you the flexibility. If you're connected to a CSP and maybe they alter the pricing or they make representations that may not be accurate, then you can say, hey, bye. Or you can be in control and not necessarily be locked in. And I think that it's really good. Vidoori was on this podcast about 6 months ago, and talking to people that are over the last 4 or 5 months, I think you're starting to offer formal learning sessions to help people understand this cloud native stuff. I mean, that's brand new, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. Yeah. We host a session, Cloud Mondays internally, or Cloud Native Mondays internally, which we, kind of take the best and brightest from around the company and put them in front of everyone. And we kind of, just to chat like we're having right here, right? Telling us what you know, why you love these different tools. And it's a really good time.
When you get in a room full of DevSecOps people, they're going to toss around Kubernetes, they're going to talk around containers and serverless and microservice and go back and forth and back and forth. So it seems like this is kind of a tool set that DevSecOps people would be very comfortable with and want to learn more about. Is that right, this community?
Oh, very, very much so. Yeah. The shifting the security left, as I mentioned, you sort of have to think about it a little bit differently. Again, emphasizing, your security personnel is going to be not a team necessarily, but it's your entirety of your organization is really the security department is the best way to think of it. Your security and microservices and containers is a little bit different, right? Scanning those dependencies, really understanding what they're running and how that communication between the services is even working. But yeah, it gives you a lot of benefit, right? You can move to infrastructure as a code and define these things in ways developers understand so that you're able to automate and, not have to do these laborious processes and minimize on-call time and things like that. So,
I live within walking distance of a 7-Eleven, and I always joke that the next time I walk in there for a Slurpee, they'll be talking about artificial intelligence. It seems to be so pervasive. It's like, how does that apply to gas stations? How does it apply to barbecue restaurants? And so artificial intelligence is almost like a mandatory thing I have to ask. And so how does this all fit in? And what's your role in understanding AI and how it can help cloud native applications?
Yeah, the AI boom is very exciting. I think kind of with the advent of, I believe it might be a buzzword at this moment, but ChatGPT has come around. Some of the listeners may be familiar with that, but essentially a similar paradigm works in a lot of different development processes, right? So chatting back and forth with a chatbot, ChatGPT, is very similar to what developers do all day, right? We write code, we type in a box, and if there can be something on the other side of that box kind of trying to say, okay, here's autocomplete, right? Here's what you might want to say. That's like a two-way conversation rather than the developer just kind of talking to the box. And in practice, this becomes probably about 70% good, right? You can't trust everything that these automated language models, as the AI is known, sort of output. But like I said, it gets you 70% of the way there, which was, more than you were at the get-go. So implementing those in our development process tastefully and seeing how secure they are, does it make sense for us, is something that we've been very keen on. They can even do things like summarize a commit for you, right? So a batch of changes to a piece of code, a project, and instead of sitting there kind of enumerating everything I've done over the last week or two, the language model has all of that context and can summarize the change. So this can increase developer velocity as well. So, and in my opinion, developer happiness.
Yeah, it's important.
So working them into the various pieces.
One way to avoid vendor lock-in is to use open source. And I think there is an organization And if I'm not mistaken, it's called the Cloud Native Open Standards that come up with standards for this. So does this fit in the discussion, or is that just too new, or is that just too, esoteric?
Yeah, the Cloud Native Foundation has a smattering of tools, and they are at various stages of acceptance, I think is what the term is. So it's sort of like a school, right? They graduate from this incubator, and that's a really good place to start looking when you have a problem in a particular category, and you want it to be very specific to the cloud, right? Whether that be storage, whether that be AI focused, text extraction, OCR. It doesn't have to be necessarily chatbots and things like that. Databases, and then you can get into some of the more fun stuff too, like service meshes, service discovery, and some of those things I think AI could truly help with in the future, in terms of intelligent routing and things of that nature.
I've worked big companies, small companies. For a period of my life, I was working for the technology area of a company called Exxon. Huge. And when I look at big companies and small companies, I contrast that to John Gilroy Donuts. Like when I'm reading as much as I can about cloud native, I'm saying, John Gilroy Donuts, cloud native may not be a good fit. However, Exxon, Progressive Insurance, NIH, larger organization, complex problems. It's not designed to solve the simple. It's really designed to solve very complex problems that have to be agile and changed all the time. And I think that's one thing I think where you may be able to sit and talk with the federal agency and go, hey, let's sit down, get a whiteboard, figure out what your problem is. You may be fine and dandy. This may be overkill for you, huh?
Indeed, yeah. If an agency has, for example, just a few applications and things are running along just fine, there's not necessarily a reason to move to microservices, or even containerize, right? That benefit kind of really shines when you start to see that scale. However, there are other ways we could benefit. Maybe are you using the right database for your application? Do you want a little more flexibility there, right? The cloud can offer different things to different people depending on the way you're coming at it.
Yeah, I think that's, these sweeping things. Everyone should move to the cloud. Everyone should do this. Everyone should eat bacon and eggs for breakfast. I mean, these everyone things are fine. But I think what's important is to find a company that maybe has depth of knowledge and experience in other types of agencies and maybe is successful enough to say, well, we're not a good fit. Have a good day. It seems like you gotta have that kind of open conversation, and I think that's what reputation that Vidoori has gained. And it's taken a while, but I just noticed over the years. But slowly, it's building and building, especially with all these learning sessions you're providing, these white papers you're appearing at conferences, and so you must have attained some success with this to have the confidence to talk with agencies about where they fit in and where they don't fit in.
Yeah. The microservices have been really good for us. We have a team of about 15 or so and growing, working on our internal product. And that is, lots of changes, lots of velocity there, in terms of the number of changes even per day, right? Yeah. And thinking about that paradigm shift, right? Maybe you deploy once or twice, a month or a quarter, right? And we've moved to something that's just a different time scale, right? So we're able to affect change in our, production or, lower environments and kind of, move from dev and test, some of those lower environments that developers are in, kind of really ironing out the changes. Those are, on-prem or even on local machines. And then, we're able to kind of mix those hybrid cloud, public, private, and get it up to the production.
It's interesting. The term cloud native been around since 2013, first introduced by AWS at AWS reInvent. So it's slowly building and building and building. But the reason it's building is because it allows for collaboration. I mean, you read the executive office, well, you must collaborate with this, you must collaborate with that. But collaboration means 5 people look at something, they want this change and this change and this change. And if the changes are too slow, they're not going to take place. So this is really more, maybe it's a collaboration tool after all. It's hard to, this flexibility with these services, it allows for scalability and flexibility that we never had before.
Yeah, the accessibility of the cloud, I think, is really one of its big benefits, right? Single sign-on, single place to go, one place to access, a single source of managing all of your resources. It's quite, and the APIs that allow you to orchestrate all of that is it's really been a benefit to Vidoori and our internal products.
Good. Well, Brandon, unfortunately, we're running out of time. If you want more information, you can go to the website, V as in victory, VIDOORI.com. If you want to go face-to-face, they got a data privacy conference they're attending here in September. I will put the link in the show notes. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Brandon Hertel, software developer at Vidoori. Thank you, Brandon.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Tech Podcast. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.